She was a single mom at age 20, and at age 27, she left having a job to do freelancing. And at 45, she sold everything to move to Mexico for 5 years. And that's where she became interested in the concept of community and emotional intelligence and promoting that. She returned to start emotionaltechnologies.com, so you might want to check out the website. Now she's had over 20 years of film business under her belt and 15 years in emotional intelligence, and she does workshops, programs, works with individuals and groups to help us all raise the bar collectively. Also, she's going to be selling some books in the hallway, in the garden room after today's service. If you're interested, she'll be there to do that as well. With that, Kat Thompson.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. Really nice to see some familiar faces here and nice to see some new faces. Thank you all for coming. So, everyday joyfulness. It's interesting. I always like to do a dictionary search of a word or a phrase before I start working on my presentation. And I was really fascinated to find that when I looked up, first of all, I looked up the definition of joyfulness, and some of the words that came out were optimism, delight, enthusiasm, happiness, pleasure, confidence, ecstasy, excitement, mirth, merriment, bliss. And I was like, yeah, I've felt all of those things, but should it be more than that? Like, shouldn't everyday joyfulness be somewhat consistent? Because it seems to me that some of these other words, like particularly ecstasy and bliss and those kinds of things, are on a wave, right? You have them and then you go down, and you have them and then you go down. So then I looked up what prevents me from being joyful, right? Just as a phrase on the internet. And it was interesting because almost every page that came up had to do with Christianity. And I was like, wow, what is this about? And so I started to explore that a little bit, and I realized that a lot of our beliefs about joy have come from a religious imprint that says we're here to suffer. And my mother epitomized this. She said to me one day, she said, you need to stop being so happy. She said, we were put here to suffer. God wants us to suffer. And the more we suffer, the more that we will have joy when we die. And I was like, I don't want to wait. I said, I'm really glad I'm not playing with your story. Like, that's your story, that's not my story. But I felt really bad for her because she really spent her life being unhappy because she thought that was what God wanted from her. And I don't think, whatever your perception of God is, I can't see God saying, I want you to suffer. I want you to be unhappy because there will be a reward later on after you die if you do suffer. So I think that there is a lot, especially in the Western culture, we have a lot of imprinting around not being joyful or being too joyful. And I think in the Midwest, I find it very, very much here. If you are too big with your joy, people just get right down on you, don't they? I remember going to see Naomi Wolf speak at McAllister one year. And I didn't know anything about her except she'd written this book, and I just wanted to see what she was like. Well, she was hilarious. So I'm in the back of this church, and I am roaring because she's so funny. And these two women in front of me kept turning around and staring at me like they wanted me to stop. They wanted me to, be demure and keep my voice down. And when I went up to get my book signed afterwards, Naomi Wolf said, "Can I just take you on tour with me, please?" Because I was an appreciative audience member, and my laughter got other people in the room laughing as well, right? So there's a spontaneity, there's a joy. When somebody's joyful, it spreads out. It's infectious. It makes people participate, right? You've all had that experience. It's why musicians love good audience members, Because if you've got somebody who's clapping and cheering and standing up and jumping up and down, the rest of the room pays attention. And then they're like, oh, maybe this is good music. I should probably listen to this instead of being on my phone. So I looked up some of the things, and I've been thinking about this a lot ever since I told Gary I would do this, which was like 6 weeks ago. I have been thinking about this a lot because one of the things that I realized about myself is how many people in the last couple of years have found their addictions skyrocketing? Sugar. And so I've been really struggling with that and questioning it and saying, why, particularly in the last 2 years, has it suddenly gotten so bad? And what is the addiction about? And I realized a couple of weeks ago, because I have been noodling on this for a long time, that my addiction comes from when I am happy, I feel like I don't deserve it. And so if I eat sugar, it makes me not like myself, and then my happiness can go away. I can justify not being happy, right? And I was appalled when I discovered that. I realized that I had these moments throughout the day where I felt this effervescent happiness, and it was uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable, and then I wanted to go eat sugar right away. And then if I did eat sugar right away, then I was mad at myself. So then the happiness got to dissipate. So I started paying attention to when does the addiction come in? And that's not the only time, but that was the big eye-opener for me. Like, some part of me doesn't believe I deserve to have happiness, to be joyful. And I am a joyful person. So it is my birthright to be joyful. And yet, between the imprinting that I got, growing up in the Catholic Church, and the imprinting from my mother, who believed that suffering was the way to God, and then also growing up in the Midwest, where you can't be too big emotionally about anything, and then there's this whole idea of deserving happiness, right? We are brought up believing that you have to do something to have happiness come to you. You have to work at it. You have to do something to deserve happiness. And I don't think that's true. I think happiness is our birthright. I think we all deserve to be happy. So here's some other things that I found when I was talking to people and I was doing some research and stuff. So imprinting was one of the things. I'm here on earth to suffer. Joy will come after I die, in direct proportion to my suffering. And an imprint is something that you learn before you're consciously able to say yes or no to something. So imprints usually happen before the age of 5. So if you grew up in a family where where nobody was happy, nobody was joyful, how would you see that modeled to you, right? Instead, you would become imprinted with the ideas about joy, that your parents had, that your teachers had, that, the people who were responsible for you in those first 5 years, the people who influenced you, you would be imprinted with those beliefs. And this sets up cognitive dissonance as you age, because you get to your conscious creator self and you think, I'm creating a life for myself that's going to be like this. And it's going to be fulfilling and I'm going to be happy. And then you have some kind of episode or an event that kind of smacks you upside the head and you go, whoa, maybe I'm not supposed to be happy. And one of the things that I've also noticed about myself is that if I'm too happy, I expect to get smacked down. Right? How many people have had that feeling? Right? So it's like we're careful not to be too happy because we don't. It's so funny because in tribal cultures they used to never compliment the baby, right? Remember this? They wouldn't compliment the baby because they were afraid that spirits would then target the baby. So they would never say the baby was pretty or the baby was, they would insult the baby instead because that was a way to keep the evil spirits away. Well, we sort of do that same thing to ourselves. Like if I'm not too happy, I won't attract any attention from out there that will try to, repress me or put me down or take away part of my joy. Let's see, what else? Selfish. Oh my goodness. How can you be happy and joyful when the world is suffering so much? I think that in the last 2 years, we've seen so much joy dissipate in our cultures. Because we're all, first of all, we've all been hammered by so much. We've lost friends and family over political views, over the COVID thing. We've lost, lots of breaks and lots of disconnections. And then, it's bad news every day, all day. Bad news, bad news, bad news. And pretty soon you're like, what is there even to be happy about, right? But also, how can I be happy when there are people suffering so greatly in the world? And it doesn't it seem like suffering is exponentially increasing? It does seem like that, but I think it's really just that's the only thing that's being reported. Nobody's reporting on the joy unless you're looking for it, right? Nobody's reporting about what's happening that's really exciting and really co-creative and really evolutionary unless you know how to look for it. You have to really work at it, right? And this is a group I know that does that kind of work. So we probably have a better sense that things are better than they look or better than they're being reported. But for a lot of people, it's just doom and gloom. And how in the world are you supposed to be joyful when everything is so gloomy all the time? Unworthiness. I don't deserve to be joyful. That is a big one. That's a big one. You have to earn it. You have to earn your joy. What have you done for the world so that you can have some joy? Right? So think about these things. These are things that might be imprinted in your psyche that are preventing you from being joyful. And the way that you change an imprint is you first of all become conscious that you have it. And then you say no to it. Every time it comes up and you recognize it, you say no to it. No, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be joyful. Perfectionism. I have to wait until things are perfect and then I'll be happy. Right? How many people have had that experience? Holy crap, I think I spent my whole 40s doing that. Once everything's perfect, then I can be happy. That doesn't really work, does it? Destination disease. I'm waiting for X, Y, or Z to have joy, right? So you're waiting for something to happen. Either you're waiting for the perfect partner, or you're waiting for the perfect job, you're waiting for that sale you made to go through, or you're waiting for the perfect house. But you're always waiting. Okay, there's an idea that joy is in the future and it'll come to you when you have your ducks in a row. And that's, again, something that we are taught in our culture. It's not maybe taught in school in that exact way, but there is an underlying belief that you have to work hard for joy. Societal issues. I have concerns about the direction of my country, or I have concerns about what's happening in my local politics, or how can I be happy when society as a whole is going to hell in a handbasket, right? Mistrust of the self. I'm afraid if I become happy, I will stop working on the important parts of myself that I want to change. So it's almost like happiness gives me permission to stop doing any sort of transformational work. There's a fear of that. There's a fear that if I'm happy, then that must mean that I accept where I am right now, and I'm not perfect yet. I got a lot of work to do. So I can't be happy till that work is done, right? So there's a certain kind of perfectionism that comes up in our life that keeps us from allowing ourselves to be happy at any given moment. Judgments. This was my favorite one that I saw. I disapprove of what the people around me are doing, and I don't want them to think that they are okay. So it's a way of withholding your happiness around people that you have a judgment with. Have you ever had that experience? Like you're happy and you're with somebody, but they won't be happy because they got a bone to pick with you, but they're not going to pick it in front of you. They're just going to be disapproving, right? Has anybody have that experience? Yeah? And so it's like withholding your happiness to punish somebody else is a peculiar thing, but it's something that we do. We withhold our own joy to punish other people sometimes. Not all of us, but Passivity, I just let life happen to me rather than walking in intentionality and passion. What that meant to me when I saw that phrase was, some people do not believe that they are creating their life. They believe that they are the victims of their life, that they are the victims of outside forces, and therefore they don't have responsibility or power. So their happiness then is dependent on what is happening from outside of them within. And you will rarely find any sort of long-term joy if you don't believe you are creating your own life. Joy, in my opinion, really comes from being grounded in your truth and sticking to it. Knowing who you are, knowing what your path is, and following it regardless of what anybody else says. There is a joy that comes from that, even if it's the most difficult path you could have possibly imagined for yourself. There is a joy about being true to oneself that can't come from anywhere else. Fear of getting my hopes up. This is one we probably all know. I don't want to experience disappointment again. Right? And I think that also might go along with that. Not only do I'm afraid to be happy because I don't want to get my hopes up, but also that I'm afraid if I'm too happy, I'm going to get smacked down, right? Those things kind of go hand in hand. Ungratefulness. I'm focusing on what I seemingly don't have rather than on what I do have. So it's like if I'm yearning to be joyful, then I'm ignoring what I also have going on already in my life. I'm not being grateful for it. And so, then the question I had for myself was like, what's the difference between gratitude and joyfulness? There is a difference, but it's very subtle. Being grateful for your life and for what you have in your life, there's a certain kind of joy in that, in gratitude. But I think because we think of joyfulness as bigger and more exuberant, that we don't maybe think that gratitude is joyful. But I think gratitude is joyful, don't you? Yeah. All right. Negative comparison. I see my faults more than my strengths. For me, this has been one of my life lessons is, it goes along with gratitude. How can you be grateful if you're always focusing on what's wrong? And so I'd have a list. Well, these are all the things that are wrong with you, so you can't be grateful because you haven't worked hard enough, and you can't be happy because you haven't worked hard enough, and you need to achieve a certain amount of goals now so that you can have happiness, you can have joy, okay? I'm over that. And the victim mindset, which is believing someone else or something else is responsible for your joy. And those are cultural myths that we are fed through movies, through books. The cultural mythology is really interesting. If you start to dissect the mythology of your culture, you will find crazy-making stuff, completely opposing belief systems that are hand in hand walking down the street together, and you're supposed to say, oh yeah, right, that is my culture, that's me, yes. So when you start to break down the imprinting that you've gotten from your culture, or what your culture tells you is true, or what your culture's hammering you to believe, and you start to question that, you will find a lot of things that don't make sense, and you will find a lot of mythology that is not serving you. And is not serving the whole. It is serving something very specific. But it's not you, and it's not the whole. All right. Addictions show us how much we are disconnected from true joy. So one of the things that addictions do is they push us out of our body. Right? Would you agree that? It's a fleeting sense of relief, it can be a fleeting sense of joy, it can be a fleeting sense of relaxation, but ultimately what an addiction does is it pushes you out of the body so that you don't have to feel the underlying pain that's asking for the addiction, okay? It's the underlying pain that's asking for the addiction. And those of you who've seen me speak here before know that my whole shtick is about emotional intelligence, and that it's about evolving emotion. We have feelings. Many of them are in their immature state. Part of our journey as a human is to evolve our emotions from an immature to a mature state. And they're very different in their immature state and their mature state. So let's talk about grief first. Grief is the first of the 5 master emotions. Immature grief is just crying for no reason, feeling so sad. It's not even really crying, because crying is actually the expression. It's that heaviness where you feel like you're going to explode with sadness. It's just like this cloud hanging over your head, or this weight on your shoulders, and it's like you're just like, there's nothing to be sad about that you can think of. Like, it's not like, oh, somebody just died. It's just this overwhelming feeling that follows you around, right? And so you wake up in the morning and you're feeling this heaviness and you're feeling this sadness, and you don't know what it's connected to. You don't know what to do about it. You try to just get through your day. And that's usually when the addiction will call, is to say, I don't like this feeling. I don't want to feel this way. So grief in its immature state is simply saying this to you: we need to let go of what no longer serves us, and we need to make room for something new. So let's cry. Crying is the action that takes grief from immature to a mature state. So get out your handkerchiefs. Let's go to fear. The immature expression of fear is terror, right? It's being afraid. And the immature expression of fear says several things to you. The first thing it says is, I don't feel safe. The second thing it says is, I don't know what's going to happen, and so I can't do anything. The third thing it says is, I need more information to be able to take action with safety. So immature fear is asking for more information. It says, keep yourself safe, but then get more information, do some research, go ask questions, find out whatever you need to find out, so that the next step you take, you can take confidently with trust that you'll be safe. All right? Mature fear is courage. Mature fear, and courage, let's clear something up. Courage is not a Marvel comic idea, right? Courage is when you are quaking in your boots and you do it anyway. It is when you are so terrified of taking that step or having that confrontation or making that move and you do it anyway. Man, I can tell you from doing this in my life that the gifts you get back from the world when you are in that state of mature fear, the gifts that the world gives you are phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Your biggest fear will be your biggest reward when you face it. You will get the most return on your investment. Anger. We've done anger up here before, haven't we? Angry anger is immature. Immature anger says several things as well. It says, somebody's lying. Somebody's trying to manipulate me. There's things are unequal. Let's see, what else does angry anger says? Something's not right. Anger saying something's not right here. Let's sit down and look at this. And anger is responsible for truth, for honesty, and I'm talking and law, and I'm talking sacred law, not man-made law, but sacred law. So angry anger says something is out of balance here, and it has to do with sacred law. It has to do with the sacredness of the whole, not these petty human laws that we get so caught up in, right? So when you mature your anger, you stand in conviction. Mature anger is never angry, or evolved anger is never angry. It is conviction, standing in your truth, speaking your truth, and nobody's going to push you off. 5,000 people can be standing there screaming at you saying, you are wrong, you are wrong, you are wrong, and you will be right here going, I'm right. I'm right for me. I'm right for me. Okay, evolved anger doesn't try to make anybody else wrong. There is no right or wrong in evolved anger. Immature anger will always try to look for right and wrong. It will always try to make the other person wrong. Mature anger, there is no right or wrong. Everybody's right. It's your truth and your communal truth that you come together with. Okay? Joy. Joy is the fourth element, the fourth emotion. Excuse me one moment, I'm getting dry. In all the work that I've done on this Chinese five-element tradition, which is where the basis of my work started, in the five master emotions here, I've never really been able to find a good description of what immature joy looked like, except that it is inappropriate. It's like the people who have to express everything as it comes into their head, right? There are some people who are that way with joy. And joy is the element of fire, and people who are imbalanced in joy or are expressing immature joy often burn the house down around them. Like they come in a blaze, and they kind of light the room up, and then they light the room on fire. And I have been that person many times. So immature joy is selfish. It really is. It's about me. It's about what makes me happy. And you can see that our world is really struggling with immature joy, right? Because we don't believe we should have it, so it stays in this immature state, and then it becomes very self-centered and very selfish. Mature joy makes everything sacred. It shares everything, and it makes everything sacred. And this is why joy comes after anger. Mature anger, evolved anger, is your warrior, and it sets your boundaries. It makes sure that you have strong boundaries, so that when you move into the joy part of yourself, and your heart wants to share, those boundaries are up, and the warrior part of you with the sword drawn says, no, not going there. This is the line. Let's just keep behind here. You can share this much, and that's it. Because that situation that you're stepping into will just take, and you're not going to get anything back. So you need your evolved anger to help your heart be open. You have to have evolved anger to protect your joy. Okay? And then finally, our fifth element is sympathy. And I'm firmly convinced now, after all the work I've done these last 20-some years, that sympathy is actually the immature state of empathy. And the last time I was here, I spoke about sympathy and empathy. Do you guys remember that? And then I went home and I had this download from the ancestors, and they said, we want to give you a little bit more information. They said empathy is a more evolved state, because in sympathy, you interact with somebody at your wounds, right? Sympathy is where you are able to vibrate with somebody because you understand each other's wounds. But empathy requires not only for you to feel exactly what that other person's feeling and understand it, but also to call them out on the co-creation of it, on the co-creation of their trauma, on the co-creation of their wound. So empathy requires a very strong warrior, again, And it has to come from the heart. You cannot be empathetic if you're not coming from the heart, because whatever message you give will not be received if it's not coming directly from the heart. Does that make sense? Okay. Evolved empathy, which is really empathy is evolved. Empathy is about restoring the environment. Restoring the environment that you live in, restoring the environment in your relationships, restoring your natural environment, restoring the environment of the world. Empathy is the experience of we are all one. And you feel exactly what your actions are doing to the world at large. You feel what you're doing to the insects. You feel what you're doing to the birds. You feel what you're doing to the native plants. You feel what you're doing to Mother Earth. You feel what you're doing to friends and family. That's empathy. You feel you have the actual physical experience of we are all one. And some people never have that experience in their whole life, but they still can believe in it and act upon it, right? So those are the 5 emotions. And the little chart on the back of your handout that I made for you, the bottom, there's a line that got left off on the bottom. Anyway, I wanted to show you, there's an inward spiral, which I have a little death head in there, because that's the spiral of going in, and that's the spiral of repression. Repressed grief becomes fear. Repressed fear becomes anger. Repressed anger kills joy and destroys the environment. So those first 3 emotions, grief, fear, and anger, those are your critical foundational pieces. Because if those are in place and those are evolving, joy comes. They build the structure for joy, for you to enter the field of love, right? The field of joy. And from there, the environment changes. The environment is susceptible to what's coming when you hit that 4th point. So if you're going in the repressed cycle, by the time you get to joy, not only is there no joy, but we are literally at that point walking around destroying our environment. The spiral of evolution goes out. So the repressed spiral goes in and gets smaller and smaller. And the spiral of evolution goes out and gets bigger and bigger. Evolved grief becomes trust. I trust myself. I trust the world. I trust myself in the world. I trust the people I'm in relationships with. I trust that everything is going to be fine. I trust that I'll be able to handle whatever comes my way, right? Evolved grief will put you smack dab in trust. Evolved fear becomes courage. Evolved anger becomes integrity. That is a word that we need more of in our world. We need more integrity. How many people here, you don't have to raise your hand, or maybe just raise a finger, but how many people here tell white lies? Okay. I swore I was not going to tell white lies anymore when I first started doing this work. And then over time, it was interesting that every once in a while, there's a period where I think, oh, I'm just going to tell a little lie. And I know that it's going to have repercussions for a long time because it breaks my integrity. It breaks my integrity with myself. And then there's going to be consequences, right? So we need to really, if there's one thing that you could focus on that would change your life quickly, it would be integrity. Never tell a lie, because what happens when you tell a lie, even a little white lie, is that you literally splinter your reality. So now you have the real reality that you're in, right? But then the lie has its own reality. And if you tell another white lie, now you have another reality. And pretty soon, your personal power is spread all over these splintered realities, and you have no personal power left. You have no power to create what you're desiring. You become really like a tennis ball, a victim of whatever's going on outside of you, right? So integrity might be the one thing, putting yourself back into integrity might be the one thing that could really leap you forward in your evolution. Look for the places in your life where you lie to yourself or break your word to yourself. If you break your word to yourself, I'm going to take you to the gym tomorrow. We're going to get up. We're going to go to the gym. We're going to work out. And then you get up and yeah, I don't really feel like it today. I think maybe tomorrow. And you know, there's a part of you that's like a little child waiting for you to keep your word, right? So don't give your word unless you plan to keep it to yourself or anybody else. So that's another way that we are stepping out of integrity with ourselves is when we lie to ourselves. When we lie to another person, we're stepping out of integrity. So look at the places where you might be slightly out of integrity and then make adjustments. Make adjustments. It is challenging to tell the truth. I don't want to come to your party today. I know I said I would, but I don't feel like it. So I'm staying home. You might lose some friends along the way, but the friends that you keep and the friends that you get when you can be 100% honest are going to be your tribe. And we really have to build our tribes right now. We have to build tribes based on integrity and honesty. All right. Until we can grieve freely and often, the path to joy will be clogged with cognitive dissonance. The path to joy walks through grief, fear, and anger. So I've covered all of that. I'm going to start asking for questions now because that's my favorite part of the whole presentation. Yes. And yes, please wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask your question.
All right. So Pat, my question has to do...
Is that on?
Hello? Can you hear me now?
No.
Is it on?
I don't think so.
I got the green light. I got the green light. Yeah.
Gary's not up there.
Okay. All right. So my question has to do with how do you maintain joy in the midst of like a catastrophic illness, for example?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. And that goes back to something I said at the very beginning about, you know, the cycle of joy, right? The cycle of joy seems to be up and down. And I do believe that emotion is all emotion is on one, high or low, right? It's high or low. And because we are made of waves, emotion is a wave too. So the more willing you are able to feel your despair, your hatred, your loss, your grief, your whatever, the higher your joy will be when it comes. And the thing to remember is when you're down in the trough, to just go, I don't live here. I'm passing through. Same thing when you're at the peak of your joy, when everything's perfect. I don't live here. I'm just passing through. But boy, while I'm here, I'm going to really show up and be here. So if you show up for the lows, then you can be present for the highs. If you try to only be present for the highs, what'll happen is your wave will collapse and you will become middle management. You will become flat, okay? So back to your question, how do you maintain joy in catastrophic illness, for example? You look for the moments. The simple moments, the way the sun is coming through that window at that particular time of the day. You're listening to the sound of birds in the morning. You're taking yourself outside of the catastrophic thing, whatever it is, and you are engaging your senses in the beauty of the world. And then those moments are joy. Those moments of watching a bird or watching a rabbit or listening to, birds singing in the morning or watching two dogs playing in the park or, the color of the flowers when they open up. Those are pieces of joy that are easily available to us, and sometimes we overlook them because they're so tiny, and we think joy is this big, loud, expansive piece, but it's made up of these tiny little nuggets. So I have some friends who are in catastrophic illness, and it's amazing to watch how they do find those pieces of joy. You know, once they've gotten through the initial shock and those kinds of reactions, the spirit seems to start looking for beauty and joy in the moment. Does that answer your question? Great, thank you. You're welcome. Anybody else who's got a question? Come on, okay, good. Otherwise I have to call on people.
Thank you. Well, a couple of things. My wife died of pancreatic cancer 9 months ago, and she died with joy in her heart. And that was the most beautiful thing for me to experience. And here she was dying of pancreatic cancer. And to me, that joy means being at peace, at peace with yourself.
Being at peace with yourself.
That's a great definition of joy.
Yeah. Thank you. So she was at peace with herself, and that was really a gift for me and for. But anyway, and my second question would be like a 60-minute Sam Wallace question.
Get me.
Yeah. All right. So you're talking. Why do you think there's so much anger in America? I mean, what do we need to do? And like I said, this is like a Sam Wallace 60 minutes. What do you think we need to do to resolve that anger?
Okay. First of all, thank you for that question. Thank you for sharing about your wife, by the way. I'm so sorry that you lost her. And what a gift to have that story to share with us. What a gift it is for us, because I do think that so much of our fear is of death. And that because we're afraid to face death until it's actually staring us in the face, we're not prepared for it. So we spend an inordinate amount of time hiding or running away or being afraid of death, when if we really accepted death, which is what a lot of tribal initiations were for young people when they turned 13 and they would have an initiation, it was to face their death. Because once you've faced your death, you live life. And when you are afraid to face your death, you never really live fully, okay? Back to your second question, why are so many people in America angry? Because we worship adolescence. And the expression of anger in America is adolescent anger. Simple, right? How would we change it if it were up to me? When I was in the film business and I did a lot of commercials out at the airport, so I had friends up in high places there. And when I started doing this work, I went to one of them and I was like, we need rage rooms in the airport where people can go in and there's rage dolls and they can beat the shit out of them and scream, and it's quiet and silent and there's no windows. And we just need for people to have a place to express their rage when their plane is canceled or something has come up. And he's like, yeah, that's never going to happen, Kat. But that's what I would do. If I were in charge of the anger in America, I would build rage rooms everywhere and teach them how to use it. I've taught children classes, and they love it because kids understand that you are hardwired to strike when you're angry. We are hardwired to strike when we're angry, which is how I even started doing rage work, because I thought, well, if I'm hardwired, why don't I just get into it instead of trying to avoid it? And that's how the rage dolls were born. And then I started doing these rage workshops. And the first workshop I did, this 87-year-old woman came, maybe she was 81. I didn't know who she was. She just must have seen the ad in the Edge or something, and she showed up at the workshop, and everybody had to beat up dolls and scream and holler and stuff. And at the end of it, she came up to me with tears in her eyes, and she grabbed my hands and she said, I've been in an abusive relationship my entire life, and I'm going home and filing for divorce. Thank you. And it was like, the most profound gift anybody's ever given me in the work that I do was to see that in this woman's life, it was not too late for her to take charge and evolve her anger and use it to take the next step. And when you evolve your anger, it always gives you the energy to take the action that's required. You get a charge of energy. Where I've seen people fall down is that they use that energy not for the thing that the anger gave it to them for, but for something different. And they don't resolve that, and then it starts over again. So, does that answer your question?
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
And I apologize because these
No,
are
that's okay.
kind of challenging
we just have a
questions.
few minutes, so just be quick with your question.
Okay, challenging question. Why do you think America still is in an adolescent state?
Because we worship youth. I mean, just look at every beauty magazine out there. Look at the obsession with youth. We don't want to grow up because then we would be responsible. We don't want to be co-creators in America. We want somebody to tell us what to do and to take care of us. And then when we've done our 40 years of work, we want to have a retirement and a cabin in the woods. And, we don't want to have to think about life too hard. That was the American dream. And now the American dream is gone. And so this is one of the things that we're facing in America is the loss of our mythology. We're not the good guys in the world anymore. Guess what? We're the bad guys. How does that sit with us? We grew up believing that we were the good guys. And now, more and more and more, as you see what's happening around the world and you listen to people from other countries, you realize that we're the bullies of the world. How does that feel? Our identity is in crises. So I think that this obsession we have with youth and with youth in our culture is really a way to avoid taking responsibility for being adult co-creators. That's my take on it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more questions? I think we might have time for one more. Go ahead. Let's get the microphone to you, and then we'll do the offering.
Yeah, my question is, let's say, because you're talking about expressing it to fullness, instead of let's say, a duller version, because for me, a person's been in recovery for a couple of years, but there's still the issue of I would compare it to colorblindness to seeing fully. Sometimes things aren't as colorful as they used to be. You live life, but it doesn't have the same impactful thing as addiction. There's things that are elevated. What things would you say, because you're talking about being able to enhance these certain emotional things. I wouldn't say necessarily living in the negative. I'm curious what the neutral would be, or if you're in because it wouldn't necessarily be anger, maybe it's just kind of anger. I like to minimize it and shorten it, but what would be a technique to enhance things? Because I know there's definitely times where you realize and you notice things or do that, but maybe it's dissipated or it's not as heavily as it could be in previous times.
Okay, thank you for your question, and I hope that I understand it, so I'll answer as best I can, and you let me know if that works for you. So what I heard you say is that sometimes with addictions in particular, things are very intense, right? And then when you're not doing your addiction anymore, things get kind of flat, right? And there is that is part of the thrill of addiction, is that things feel more colorful, as you would say. I think that if in any program that you go through for addiction, one of the things that they focus on is how do you feel the same level of life when you're not doing the addiction. And I had a friend who was a heroin addict, and he told me years after he quit doing it, many years later, he said, life has never been and never will be as bright and alive as it was when I was shooting heroin. For him, it was just over when he stopped doing heroin. His life was gray forever after that. And I thought that was kind of that was kind of sad. I don't know the answer for how you get back to how to make life full and fun and exciting again, except that you have to follow your joy. And when you follow your joy, you have to listen to your anger, right? So if you feel anger, and it's not an overwhelming anger where you feel like you have to take a rage doll and beat it up, but anger's a messenger. So if you feel a little tweak of it, you can just say, why did I just feel that anger? One time I was with a friend of mine in Mexico, and we got into a fight, and she kept saying, why did you do that to me? I would never do that to you. Why do people do things to other people that the other person would never do back? Well, I don't understand. And I was so frustrated, and so I was like, okay, I'm just listening to my anger, because I felt really ashamed. She was right. I had done something that was completely out of context for me. And I was listening to my anger, and my anger said, you're asking the wrong question. The question should be, why do we think we co-created this experience together? And I said, you're asking the wrong question. And I told her, and she's got so excited. She's like, why did we co-create this? And within 5 minutes, we had uncovered 10 years of stuff that hadn't been talked about and just got layered on and built up over, and boom, it all came out in the wash. And then we had this transition into some other better relationship. So is that helpful for you? Did that answer your question? You're not?
Well, like, to a degree.
To a degree? Okay. Is there anything else that you can tell me?
Specifications. You want specifics?
Pardon me?
Well, like you answered the first part, like for some people, gray is ad infinitum. But like, because I know there is it, but it's just like the not necessarily continual chase. Like in my own mind, I'm like thinking like, self-care, all these other beneficial things. But then like, I'm also thinking like when you were saying like, could it also be like also, it's easy to do like the lies yourself, like I'm gonna do this or I want to do that, and then like you're disappointing that younger self inside. So like,
okay.
I'm
all
also
right.
curious if like those
Okay.
things would come into fruition if you added on those layers.
What I'm gonna say is this. I think that if you find a passion and you follow it, your life will settle itself. I think that when you follow your passion, you will run up against all of your belief systems that tell you that you can't do it or you can't have it. I think you will test yourself in many, many ways. I think you will find your joy. I think that the act of following your passion, and the hardest thing for me during COVID was I had no passion at all. I felt like I didn't have anything, no dream in my life at all. And that is the first time in my life it's ever happened, and it was tough. So it took me some time to really kind of work through like, what's the next phase of my passion look like? So I would say, find passion within yourself for something and follow it, no matter where it takes you, and see what happens. All right? Okay. That's it. We're going to go to the offering now, and then we'll do the closing circle. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be out here afterwards.
Okay, now it's time for the offering. Dig deep while you're digging deep. I'll remind you that we are an entirely independent organization dependent on your donations. Also, you can go onto our website and be a regular donor. By being a regular donor, that truly helps to sustain us as well, like here at spiritualcommunity.org. Okay, and then after this, we'll have a closing circle. Okay, if you'll join me in blessing this offering, God's perfect love, flowing through me, blesses and multiplies, all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am. Aho. Okay, if you'll circle up now for our closing circle, it may be that we'll circle around this, just and then a hole outside.
And you want to be close enough to hold hands, but we're not actually going to be holding hands. So like, come closer. Come here. Yeah. We can start holding hands. We can start out holding hands. So that we know everybody's. All right. So you guys have to keep going. Or we might be able to go all the way to the back row. Maybe. Let's us come back this way. There we go. Now we can see everybody. All right, so we're going to drop our hands. You're going to put your left palm up and you're just going to leave it there. Take your right hand and on your neighbor's right, and the neighbor on your right, you're going to just feel till you can feel till the two chakras in the hand connect, and you'll feel the energy right away. Woo! Wow, what a group. Wow. Can you guys feel that? All right. So energy comes in the body on the left side, that's our feminine side, and it exits the body on our right side, our masculine side. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this energy moving around the circle, and as it comes around each time, you're going to pass it through your heart, and you're going to find that place in your heart that's filled with joy. And you're just going to add a little bit of that joy, send it back around the circle, wait till it comes back, and each time it comes back around, you're going to add a little more joy. So just feel that circle of energy moving around and how it's picking up joy from every single person in the room. Now, normally, when we build up this circle of energy, we send it out somewhere. Today, we're going to do something a little different. So on the inhale, we're going to bring our hands into a ball. So on the inhale, bring your hands together into a ball, and then just sort of exhale slowly. And this ball of energy is made up of the joy of all the people here in this room, okay? And since we're so good at giving our joy to others, this is how we're going to give ourselves the others' joy too. So on the inhale, we're going to just hold that ball, and on the exhale, we're going to slather it over our heart. So take a deep breath in, and on the exhale, put that right into your heart and let your heart expand. And then feel that ball of energy radiating out of your field, radiating into the circle, and that circle radiates out all through South Minneapolis, and then through the Twin Cities, and then through the Midwest, and then through the North American continent, and all through the globe. Joy is spreading and contagious. Let's make this the next pandemic. Joy. The joy thing.